Greetings, Lakeview family. Hope you are doing well this week and enjoying the weather that is warming up. It's quite fun. Hopefully, it's inviting you outside and to enjoy what this late spring moving into summer offers, especially in our area and especially on Sundays, like when we are out on the patio in our fellow discipleship time and those mornings before worship. So I invite you to come, grab some coffee and some snacks, and hang out on the stoop. It's a great time to just be out, kind of more in our neighborhood and showing to the world who we are and greeting each other as we come to the door. It's great. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to Sunday and starting a new series that my working title that I think will stick. I mean, it is Wednesday when I'm recording this, so you never know. But my working title is Keeping Up with Jesus, Not the Joneses. So I don't know if you're familiar with that phrase at all, but keeping up with the Joneses and this kind of idea of, not this idea, but the reality that we as humans often are ruled by this idea of comparing ourselves to others, and it shows up in a variety of ways. And in our current context, I think with the onset and the pervasiveness of social media, that is even more significant. Just the constant barrage of seeing everybody else's best through the lens of our worst, right? So we are constantly trying to, or not trying to, we're constantly having to sift through these images, the realities of what we see in other people. And depending on your personality, this can be more significant or less significant in terms of how it controls your life and how you think, and particularly how you think about yourself. So we're going to look at that and through this lens of what it means to be a disciple and make disciples. But we're going to journey through some Old Testament texts. So for the next probably better part of 2+ months, we'll be in the Old Testament and beginning in Samuel. And so the lectionary has us starting in Samuel, kind of going through parts of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. So looking at this unique season in the history of the people of Israel, starting with Samuel, where the people ask for a king. So we'll set it up this week with the initial call of Samuel and establishing who Samuel is. And I think what we see in the life of Samuel and how he comes into his position and how the Lord brings him to that, it really provides a thread, both when you look at Samuel's life and specifically, which we'll kind of touch on, but we won't read, but Hannah's prayer. So Hannah is Samuel's mom, the prayer that she prays, which speaks so much about who God is. Remember, this whole narrative of Scripture, as we look at Scripture, it is always and only teaching us about God. Now, there are things we learn about ourselves, about culture, all these things, but the primary thing that we are looking at in Scripture, that Scripture is designed to speak, is truths about who God is and how God is working in the world. And in Hannah's words, in her prayer of thanksgiving for this gift that God has given to her, remember, she was barren into her kind of later years, and then the Lord blesses her with Samuel. So her words of gratitude speak about who God is and how God works in the world, that God is on the side of the oppressed and the marginalized, bringing up those who are weak in the world and bringing down and humbling those who are in positions of power. And so these are all things that we see and learn about who God is. And then next week, when we look at specifically when Israel asks for a king and Samuel is frustrated and God relents and says, give the people what they want, we hold all these things in tension, like recognizing that God knows that this is not what is best for the people of Israel, but he allows them to choose that. And specifically because their request is, we want to be like everyone else. How many times have you maybe not uttered those words, but just in the way you lived your life? I know for me, so many times, decisions that I make or things that I do or say or don't do. In my case, probably it's more things that I don't do, omission, because I want to be like everyone else. And this wasn't just a thing that plagued me when I was younger. I mean, these are things that I wrestle with even to this day as a pastor, looking at other pastors, other churches, things that I constantly need to hold in tension, knowing that God hasn't called me to be like everyone else. God has called me simply to be like Jesus and to recognize that radical obedience is the way. And looking at the person of Jesus, when we really recognize this, it's the cruciform way, right? The journey of Jesus is downward mobility. It's not being like everybody else. It's giving self away. It's emptying ourselves for the sake of the world. It's humbling ourselves. And this message goes just right in the face of what we hear in culture. And I would even argue within some parts of Christian subculture, evangelical subculture to be specific, where power and control are finding themselves working their way to the top. And that's just not how the kingdom works. So we're going to look at these things through the lens of the Old Testament. Starting with Samuel, we'll spend some time, some decent time with David and his journey, and looking at who God is in the midst of this, who God is calling God's people to be throughout time and history, and what it means for us. And this Sunday's text, I'm super excited because there's a word that jumps out. It's used 3 times, and it's a simple word, yet. So it talks about early on how the lamp of the Lord had not yet gone out. We'll discuss, there's maybe a double meaning there to what that means. I think specifically speaking about the lamp in the temple, but also could mean the lamp of God in terms of the people of Israel. It also says that in this text, part of the reason why Samuel, if you know this story, doesn't know who the voice is, the first 3 times he's called, and runs to Eli, because it says that Samuel did not yet know the Lord, and the word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. So in this text, we see early on this young Samuel who is given back to God in service of God, who is in service of the temple. He was under Eli, in a sense being mentored by Eli. Eli, whose vision is so unique, right? His eyes were weak. We think about that in comparison to who Moses was, how Moses' eyes were at the end of his life. Full vision, he could see all the way across all of the promised land. And yet it is this Eli whose sons have blasphemed the Lord, and a curse has been called down and will be reiterated through Samuel's first prophetic utterance, right, as this word against Eli, this man who's mentoring him. But Eli, even in his old age, who had allowed so much corruption to happen in his own house, whose eyes were weak, but he still recognizes when God is speaking. Sure, maybe it took 3 times, but he recognized it, and he pointed that out to Samuel, who had not yet heard the voice of the Lord, but in that moment was taught how to hear the voice of the Lord and how to respond. And we'll talk about Samuel's initial responses and then his response that was instructed by Eli. And then Eli's reception, right, of God's judgment and recognizing God is good and not shirking responsibility, but accepting the reality of what will come and what that means and what that actually says about who Eli was, even with all that had happened. So it'll be a fun Sunday. I'm excited. It'll be a fun series. I hope it becomes a practical call for us as people. We can wrestle through some things. And I'm chewing with some challenges for us as a people as we head into summer and as we combat this idea of comparison and ways that we can make some legitimate, like real adjustments or changes in our life to reorient what gives us the most voice and value, right? What we're listening to and adjusting and kind of turning down or turning off just the fire hose of other information that's coming to us and tuning our hearts to be able to really hear and listen to the voice of God. So have a great week. Be praying for our church, be praying for our world, be praying for each other, and know that you are prayed for and loved, and we will see you all Sunday. Peace.